we have anybody?
So thank you all for joining us today. Welcome. My name is Ryan Anderson. I am the outreach manager for Kendal at Home. And thank you for joining us today on our course series seminar. So we hope that these courses will help engage, inform, and educate members and prospective members too, and the community. And we want to always give a special thanks to the Friends Foundation for the Aging, as they have generously supported our programming efforts and allow us to put on these events for all of you that we have going on today. And so please plan on joining us for upcoming programs as well. And please be free to invite family members, friends, anyone you think might be interested in these programs. These programs that we put on for both members and prospects are not restricted to just yourself. So they're open to all community members, family, friends, neighbors. So please feel free to spread the word on them. And then at the conclusion of today's talk, we will provide details of upcoming programs that we have going on that you might be interested in. And just some quick housekeeping before we start on it. Down at the bottom of your screen, Q&A and chat are both options available for you. If you have any questions or comments that you want to ask throughout the program, please feel free to ask those in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll address those as they come along. But now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Bill Reed of Regenerative Group with us today. So Bill, thank you very much for joining us. And if you don't mind just sharing before you begin, just a quick overview of your background and who Regenerative Group is.
Sure. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Paul. Glad to be here. And all right, well, my background, I'm an architect. I like to say I'm a recovering architect because I really don't practice building design anymore. Since the beginning of my practice life, I've been involved with the environment, whether it's energy efficiency or the U.S. Green Building Council. I'm one of the founders of the LEED rating system. Some of you may be familiar with that. And with LEED, for instance, which is a checklist of green building criteria for reducing the damage to the environment, we realized that it's a whole system and you have to be able to integrate it. And so that set me off on a journey is how do we integrate and what do we integrate into our building designs? And so that led me to go into a deep dive in terms of how we work with complex systems. And when we ask the question, where do we stop integrating, whether it's building systems or site or people, the answer is we never stop integrating. And so that leads to the question, what gets included in building design? So this talk today is really about how we embrace the living systems, the natural systems, nature that supports our lives in the process of design, of architectural design and engineering. So we're not talking about buildings directly today. We're talking about the impact and the system that we can address in a mutually beneficial way to human life and the life that supports us. Regenesis is a company that's been around for 26 years, and it was formed by a group of people who are permaculturists. They were engaged in the permaculture movement 35 years ago, and they were working for a client that had been dealing with corporate America in terms of integrating people into a system that served its customers more effectively. Well, that's a kind of a whole system, and permaculture is working with a whole system of nature. And they said, well, wait a minute, nature and humans, we were the same thing. We need to be integrating that. And so Regenesis is about how do humans and nature collaborate and become effective co-evolutionary participants. And how do we then use building design as an opportunity to engage that level of let's call it design, in terms of designing a future that we can call truly sustainable. Does that help, Ryan? Is that enough?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great insight into background, but also the movement as a whole, and working together, humans and nature. Oftentimes with people often look back to the Industrial Revolution and all the changes that happened there, and saying that we got away from how cultures and civilizations were before then, where it was more of a harmony. And so it's great to hear of groups and movements trying to bring back that harmony all together.
Yep, and more people are beginning to practice that way. So it's a good thing.
Yeah.
All right, care for me to dive in here?
Absolutely.
Dive away. All right, so I'm going to share screen. Let's see. Got the right one here. All right. So we're talking about regenerative development, and development means how do we actually continue to evolve? It's a synonym for evolution. So evolving ourselves, our relationships, and our places, because unless we're evolving ourselves, we cannot necessarily participate effectively with the groups that we're working with. So the relationships. If I'm a jerk, I'm not going to be very effective in groups. And the group will not be very effective if I remain a jerk. So the idea of evolution requires us to be cognizant of who we are becoming, who our relationship, our self-group actualization, which is what organizational development does, in order to serve the health of the places we live. So that's a broad premise behind this talk today and the practice that we engage in. So what are we sustaining with sustainability? This is about sustainability. However, we are not sustaining buildings. We are sustaining life. We're not sustaining photovoltaic panels or sustainable paint or living roofs even. We're sustaining the processes of life. So the question is then, if we're sustaining life, we ought to know what it is. So what is life? And that's obviously a 2,000 year, 4,000, 5,000 year question that no one has really defined with any sense of precision. But the best that I've ever seen is that life is the process of becoming. Life is continually evolving, becoming into a new state. What's interesting about life is that life runs up. And what does that mean? It's that actually life, if you let life on its own, let's say a hurricane comes through, and nature will actually express itself in greater and greater complexity and recover a complex system. Whereas if we are actually working with physical or technical systems, mechanical systems, they suffer from entropy. Over time, they rust, they decay, they slow down, they need lubrication, they need constant maintenance. Life does not need that maintenance. It actually takes off on its own. Now, that's very powerful. And why don't we work with those forces instead of the forces that keep requiring our maintenance? And so the premise behind living systems design is that we're working with organisms on their own terms and aligning ourselves with that power, if you will, and effectiveness. I love Gregory Basins' statement, the major problems of the world are the result of the difference between the way nature works and the way people think. And generally, our culture thinks that we can repair things, we can fix things, we reduce things to the smallest manageable piece, and then we can tweak it. And life does not work that way. When we start tearing apart life to the smallest piece, let's say that we dissect a frog. The minute we dissect the frog to understand how the liver works, we've destroyed the frog. The frog no longer is froggy, if you will. So reducing life to component parts is not the way life works. So how do we work with life on its own terms is part of the subject of this talk today. One other big thing, of course, the carbon issue, climate change is a gigantic topic and will be more and more so as people realize this isn't immediately fixable. But climate change can't be fixed. Climate change is a symptom of not understanding life and our role in it. Even if we invented cold fusion or nuclear power that was clean and non-invasive, some powers, cold fusion power, we would still be destroying the planet in multiple ways, whether it's how we treat each other, it's how we deal with monoculture agriculture, how we deal with pollution, how we deal with overabundance of, well, certainly carbon, but the impact on the land, water pollution, et cetera. we would still be destroying ourselves. So climate change is just one symptom of many. So how do we work on the whole system is the question. This is a diagram that will at least frame where we're going today. And I'm going to try to give you some theoretical background in the beginning and then move into a couple of case studies just to show you how this work is practiced. So here we are, a conventional design. Randy Croxton, an architect in New York City, says, we build our buildings one step better than breaking the law. Not very motivating, really. We come along and we realize we can do better. And so LEED, a rating system, or BREEAM in England, or Green Globes, or Green Stars, so many programs around the world that actually say you can reduce energy usage, you can reduce water pollution, you can reduce the toxicants in the environment. By how much? And they give you a benchmark and a metric to measure against. And let's say that we can reduce our energy use by 70 or 80 or 90% compared to current code standards. That's a really good thing. However, it is still dumping carbon into the atmosphere. It is still damaging the environment. So we like to say green building is just a slower way to die. It's good, but it's insufficient. So that leads us to then, what is sustainability? And people call green buildings sustainable buildings. They are not, because they're not sustainable. It's just a word that we use. But sustainability implies that we've reached a neutral state. We're not damaging things at all. But no building can do that. We are always damaging something when we build. So if that's the case, we might as well go out and have a party, because we're never going to solve this problem. We need to then jump into restoration and regeneration. And sorry for, is that bird overcoming my mind?
It is there.
It is there. Let me just pause for a minute and take care of the bird. And I'm just going to cover it. Thank you. So restoration and regeneration mean two different things. And we're going to explain that in more depth in a minute. But restoration means to restore something to its original condition, which is impossible in life. So what are we really saying with restoration means that we are restoring an ecological subsystem so it has the self-organizing capability to evolve. So whether it's a wetland or a beach dune system or a forest or a riparian corridor, we're giving life the chance to recover its evolving capability to evolve. Regeneration asks human beings to participate in that in an ongoing way, because life continues to evolve. What happens 10 years from now when we forget why we restored something and said, I need a shopping mall there? So holding the memory of why we do things and how to adapt as life continually adapts requires us to regenerate that relationship. So regenerative development is about developing our capacity to participate with life on its own terms. Or in other words, a continual process of rebirthing and restoration. What's important, though, is to understand that this work, I kind of gave it a bad rap here, that the slower way to die, we need that. We need to stop dumping carbon into the atmosphere. We need to stop dumping toxicants into the ocean, that kind of thing. And we also need this. So we've got to be working on both those dimensions at the same time, reducing the damage and working with life on its own terms. So this is an ecology. And the idea, we often refer to the environment. The environment is that, by definition, that which is outside of us. What we're really working on is our role within this ecological system. It is a whole system. All right, I will think I can keep going here. I'll skip this right now. So, oh yes, another thing is that this is an extractive worldview. This is a co-evolutionary worldview. And now let's define this a little more generally. So it's taking that diagram and now looking at what Carol Sanford, the business consultant in regenerative systems, calls the four modern paradigms. The first one is extract value. I think we can pretty well understand what that is. We pull resources from the earth, nutrients from the soil, or from the land. We actually pull spirit and human dignity from employees if we mistreat them. So that's the extract value paradigm. So we need to fix that. So the arrest disorder, and I like to call it slowing down the damage, is what we've been doing with LEED and green building systems and laws and planning opportunities. We're slowing down the bad decisions that we've made in this extract value paradigm. That's okay. Still not very sufficient, but it's slowing down the damage. So the next one is do good. And that sounds pretty good, except when it isn't. And do good actually can be a trap, because, and let me give the simple example is the World Bank and the aid industry, international development community. Let's say we go to Africa and say, we're going to show you how Europeans live and the North Americans live because we have a great quality of life. And we're going to give you this gift of our lifestyle. But in fact, they never asked for it. And we know how well that's worked out. So the do good paradigm can be a form of colonialism. But more importantly, a do good paradigm without understanding the people that we're working with is always an imposition. So that then leads into what's the next one. And this is where we want to hang out today, is how do we work with the inherent potential of any living entity? And I think inherent, let's just go let me give you some definitions here and then we can move on. So I think the first three I think are fairly self-explanatory, but let's read this one. Evolving inherent potential, or the innate capability of any entity, whether with people or life sheds. Every living entity asks that we approach it individually to reveal and support its unique potential. All right, so what does that look like? This little girl apparently wants to be a pilot, and her inherent potential is to be a pilot. If I force against my desires for her, let's say I want her to be a pro tennis player, and I force her to be a pro tennis player, she'll be on a psychologist's couch for the rest of her life. So what a good parent, I think most people would acknowledge, is actually allowing that child's essence or internal inherent potential to be expressed. So I want to check this with Ryan and Paul. Does this make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, like, how I'm at least hearing it is you can't necessarily force something upon someone to do it. It would almost, you have to have that collaborative effort in order to figure out what are those progressive next steps to reach that desired goal while still working with the individuals and granting them that autonomy and individuality to it.
Perfect. Now, if we understand that, the premise that we hold in our work is that every place on the planet, whether it's New Orleans or New York or Pittsburgh or Beijing, is a unique organism, is a unique living system. And in order to work with that on its own terms, not our terms, we need to understand its inherent potential. And that's the foundation of regenerative thinking. So we go to the Los Plateau in China. What's its inherent potential? Well, it's a desert, but we know that it wasn't always a desert. It was desertified because of bad farming practices. Simply actually acknowledging those bad farming practices and saying we can do better allowed it within 18 months. And this 18 months number keeps coming up in this work to begin the restoration process. This stream in New Mexico, this is actually a useful story. I think I'll take a moment to tell this story. A permaculturist, Bint Lawrence, bought this ranch, and it is a desert. This is outside Santa Fe, about 40 miles outside of Santa Fe. And on it was never running water in white man's recorded memory. And so our crew and his took a look at this land to look at its inherent potential. And they looked at meteorological, geological, and cultural conditions. So meteorologically, we found out that this land got 10 to 15 inches of rain a year, 10 to 12 inches of rain a year for the last 5,000 years. So that was no surprise. Geologically, underneath just a couple inches of dirt was a half a meter of humus that could only have come from the bottom of ponds in the desert. So where did that come from? That was a surprise. And then culturally, we went to Durango, Colorado, and found out that there were diaries from Wild Bill Williams, who had a band of mountain men. And Wild Bill Williams recorded that they went to Santa Fe, to this area of Santa Fe, to hunt beaver. So there's no such thing as sand beavers. So what was going on here? And didn't really know, except that obviously must have been water, because that's what beavers do, is they work with water. So they took the pattern of dam building and said, well, let's just put up some dams where beavers would logically have built their dams. And within 18 months, there you can see one of these check dams, within 18 months, there was a permanent running stream on this site in the desert with no water for the last 200 years. Now, that's a pretty spectacular story, because if you're in the desert, you know that water is the most valuable thing you can be finding, and to have it appear all of a sudden. So what made that work is that, in fact, it does snow and rain, as we acknowledge, but that water sheets off in the desert and evaporates. But if you can hold the water back behind a dam, it gives the water a chance to saturate the groundwater and raise the groundwater table, and that is a stream. Now that, if you will, might be called deep restoration or rebirth. You might call it regeneration. People use regeneration as a synonym for restoration, but it's a little fuzzy in that area. What makes this regeneration is that every farmer in the valley said, whoa, if that works there, we want to do that on our ranch. And that is how you regenerate the system, by getting the people involved in participating with nature on its own terms. Now, I keep talking about the word 18 months. What we see is that nature recovers itself, begins to recover itself within 18 months of our working with it on its own terms. And we talk about healing the world and how difficult it is. It's not difficult at all if we work with this resonant power of nature on its own terms. That's the most powerful message that I can give today, is that we actually have the solution right in front of us if we know how to work with her. The Jordan Desert, this is a little longer than 18 months, but not much, from this to that, by actually using 4/5 less water, but by working with holding the water with mulching, et cetera, and tending it on. Basically, it's a citrus farm in the desert. Alan Savory's work in Zimbabwe, from the desiccated environment to that, even with severe rainfall failure, by actually understanding that antelope and all the hoofed animals, when we introduced cattle to Africa and penned them in, they destroyed the ecosystem. But Africa has billions of hoofed animals, but they move after they eat the grass. They chew it, some seeds fall out of their mouth and they defecate it. They've eaten the good grass and they move onward. But in moving out of that area, they actually step on those seeds, they plant it into a little vessel, and within 4 weeks, there's a whole new crop of grass grown. And all Alan Savory observed is that it's a grazing process. And once you start moving the cattle, just like nature moves its natural inhabitants, this place can recover on its own terms. So this is about aligning ourselves with the processes and patterns of nature. I love this story from Kat Anderson's book, Tending the Wild. California Native peoples believe that when humans are gone from an area long enough, they lose the practical knowledge about correct interaction, and the plants and animals retreat spiritually from the earth or hide from humans. When intimate interaction ceases, the continuity of knowledge passed down through generations is broken, and the land becomes wilderness. Wilderness is not an absence of people. Wilderness is an absence of relationship. And that's a really important message for us in these days. Oh, I already had that quote. So onward. Sebastian Sagato's land in Brazil. This is what it looked like once he got back from his photography missions in Africa. 10 years, look at that. So I think I'm making the point. There's Beijing after COVID. 2 months, clear air. So we know that we can heal the planet. We just have to have the will, the desire to do so. This is a civil engineer's view of a stream in Baltimore, Maryland. Once they started holding the water back and retaining vessels, instead of allowing it to rush through this stream, which is why they built a concrete out of it, because it was tearing up the earth and sending suspended solids into the Chesapeake Bay. Once they started slowing down the water like it did when it was naturally forested, we were able to restore it. Biohabitats work. And this is 3 years later from that to that. So there's a lot of hope here. So inherent potential. Now let's think about the places we live, places as living organisms. Every place has its unique identity and its unique potential. And our job is, if we're going to build there, is to understand that not only nature, but the social, because humans are nature too. What are the social systems, the ecological systems that we need to be part of and actually help support. So here's a simple, small example that I think is useful. We were asked years ago, this is early 2000, to work with the Brattleboro Food Co-op in Brattleboro, Vermont. And it's a grocery store, basically, but a community-owned grocery store. And they asked us, can you help us with a LEED Gold grocery store? And we said, well, sure, we can do that. But we want to ask you, do you want sustainability, or do you just want LEED? Because there's a difference. LEED is not sustainability. LEED is green building, but it's still the dying system that you're working with. They said, well, we want both, which was a great answer. And so we did a little bit of research on the system that the building was nested in. Well, it's a food system. And so we found out that the average bite of food in the United States travels 3,600 miles. Talk about, there's nothing we could do in the building that would negate the carbon footprint of the food being shipped around the world. So we said, well, why don't we work on the food system? Well, what does that mean? So when we met, the first time we met with the executive committee, we took them on a tour of the grocery store. And the first bin that we came to in the produce section was the apple bin. And guess where the apples were from? New Zealand. And there were strawberries from California, and there were blueberries from Chile. This is Vermont, Northeast US. So that explains that 3,600 miles. How far did food travel before the Industrial Revolution? Maybe 10 miles, 20 miles. So big difference. And so we asked the question to these guys, what happens if there's a truckers' strike and the food can't get delivered from so far away? They said, well, we're out of business in 3 days. They said, yeah, we've been thinking about that. If Whole Foods, which is a grocery chain in the US, if Whole Foods comes into town, we're probably out of business in a year. So what's the one thing that Whole Foods or a truckers' strike can't compete with? And that's local food. So this became the design of the grocery store. Whoops, before I get to that, we also looked at the community, and we found that this community was really engaged with food. They have a parade called the March of the Heifers. I mean, how many towns do that? Big farmers markets. So there was a big localization and food revitalization movement there. They engaged in the working landscape, which allowed us then, this was part of their nature, to then explore the nature of the food system. So we looked and found all these green areas are old farms that had been abandoned because the soil, the extraction of nutrients from the soil over the last 300 years has been so severe that the soil barely supports functional farming anymore. The best soil was in downtown Brattleboro. The site of the project is right there. Here's the best soil. And somebody said, well, we built on everything. No, you haven't. You've only built on 35% of the land in most towns. Where did most towns feed themselves in World War II? Backyard gardens, victory gardens. So backyard gardens can be incredibly productive. And so this grocery store was first programmed in the way we were working with them to become an agricultural and soil extension service to teach people how to grow their own food again. And a cannery where they could can their food. Remember, this is a co-op. This isn't a retail, just a retail store. A cannery where they can their food. An abattoir for hunters to dress their meat. A daycare center to take care of the kids when the parents are doing that work. What else? Oh, a credit union to loan money for people to begin to re-farm this area. Along with that, a forestry service to begin to work on the replenishment of the nutrients in the soil. And by the way, a grocery store. So all those attributes and aspects of this building and the opportunity to serve the cooperative movement in the city came out of a building, green building, looking at, what do we do to be green? Now, the executive committee was so excited about this that they rushed us. This is my excuse. They rushed us to do a presentation to the board. And my colleague and I, it was a disastrous meeting. They call it the double train wreck meeting. We had, and finally, one of the board members said, listen, buddy, what is all this stuff? All we wanted was a grocery store. So we realized we were actually fired that night. And we realized, oh boy, we needed what we missed in this is we did not engage all the stakeholders as an integral part of this system. Remember, humans are nature. So it was a big learning for us. We went back, we wrote a 60-page report and said, here it is. And I'm a Vermonter as well, we're pretty parsimonious, we're cheapskates. The co-op read this report and digested it. And we got a call almost a day to the year later. And the president of the board said, Bill, we want to apologize. This is the best thing that's ever happened to us. We've developed a 100-year policy to incorporate these ideas and evolve the ideas of this work that you were doing. So what happened is, and by the way, this is paradigm shifting stuff, right? We're not working on an object. We're not working on a thing, a building. We're working on the system that the building is supported and the people in the building are supporting. And as a result of that, whoops, I'll come back in a second to that slide. The building itself, as the president said, the building itself wasn't as important as we thought. It inspired a process to continually regenerate the system, a 100-year policy. So the way we work is that instead of the project and then kind of negotiating relationships with stakeholders, what we're doing is we're gauging all the stakeholders, wish we engaged all the board members, for instance, in this case, to actually work towards the health of the system that we're part of. The building, the project itself, emerges from that understanding, just like this co-op emerged from the program in this building emerged from what the system needed, not what we thought strategically that we needed to do to fit into the green building worldview. Is that we first had to look and study how the humans and nature have interacted over hundreds, if not thousands of years to understand what role this project and the people in it could play. Let me pause there for a moment. Is this holding together?
I have a question kind of related to where we are now. May I?
Sure.
And you kind of answered it with your description of the reaction of the Brattleboro Co-op. Two things related. One is, do you often find yourself in a position to talk people out of a project that they came to you for?
Yeah, it's a great question. We try not to talk people out of anything. In fact, I'll show you, I'm going to share with you another case study, and the project manager of that case study, it's called Viña del Mar down in Chile. The project manager said they had already done the master plan for this project and then invited us down to do our work. And he said, Bill, are you going to make us change our master plan? And he said, I'm not going to make you do anything. You're going to want to when we're done. And so, which actually frightened him more than if I had said, yes, we're going to force you. Because he realized, oh, maybe I got to rethink the way I look at the world.
Yeah.
But in fact, it did change significantly because of this, Paul, looking outside, looking what does the system need and how can we be in support of that system? Because it's a relationship, right? We have to provide value to the system, or else it's not a sustainable project. And that system, of course, provides value to us. It provides relationships, it provides water, it provides habitat, it provides clean air, right? Plus customers if we're a store. So how are we in relationship with this larger system will determine the future success and long-term sustainability of the project. Does that get it?
Can I just, related
Yeah.
to that,
Please.
how do your clients find you? And do they find you because it's a reasonably, I assume that you're one of, probably not millions of organizations that are
No,
doing
very
what you
few.
do.
Yeah.
And do they find you thinking that they're going to be engaged in a very different process than they actually are engaged in when they actually start working with you?
They never realize how different it is.
Yeah.
Because it requires them to change how they think about building design and how they think about their relationship with the system, with the people in that system, with the living system. It's a hard shift, and it's almost, it is, for many people, it's transformational. They say, oh my goodness, I never realized it was like this. I never realized it could be like this. Never realized this could be our role. And when they find people in the community saying, this is what we want from you, this is what I'll share with you, this will be answered in this next case study, I think, Paul.
Okay. And I just, sorry to bog you down,
No, no,
but two more very quick
good,
kind
this
of
is great.
definition of terms. One is permaculture.
Yeah.
Can you define that? And life sheds?
Yeah, I thought life sheds was kind of intuitive. It's not my term.
Well,
Okay,
I'm not that smart.
But no, it's just, instead of watershed, it's not just water, it's a whole system of life that makes that possible. So it's actually more accurate to say life shed instead of watershed. So that's what we're using. That's a simulacrum. And then what was the other term?
Permaculture.
Oh yeah, permaculture. So permaculture stands for permanent agriculture. And so how do we have a permanent agriculture? It means we have to have a culture that understands how we grow food in support. Instead of extracting nutrients from the soil like industrial agriculture, we're destroying the soils that give us life. I don't know, go to the USDA website sometime and you'll find that most of the foods that we eat are 40 to 60% less nutritional than they were 60 years ago. One of the reasons why we gain weight, by the way, in our culture is that we're eating really bad food. And it's just food because the soil provides those nutrients. And when we extract nutrients without replenishing them with a balanced circulation of crops and rotation of crops and diversity of species, it's over. So permaculture is a concept of living in that kind of balance relationship with soil. That help? Great. All right, onward. Thank you. Those are great questions. So one of the things is that we use the idea of healing the earth. We're going to save the earth. Well, good luck with that. You can't save the earth. It's too big. It's too abstract. There's no CEO in charge anyway. My little effort in my building, right, is not going to do anything. Let me use that example about LEED Platinum, which is the highest rating that you can get in the LEED rating system. Imagine 100,000 LEED Platinum Walmarts sprinkled around the world. Do you think we've saved the earth? I don't think so. So this means that we have to look way beyond the building, which is really what regeneration is about. So what are we looking? So we use the term life shed. That's about the largest level of system that we can manage. Elinor Ostrom, whose name you see down here at the bottom, was the Nobel laureate in 2009 for her work on common pool resource. And what she found out and proved that if the system is too big, we will extract from it. This is what Garrett Hardin's article, The Tragedy of the Commons, you may be familiar with that article. Tragedy of the Commons says that as long as we think it's somebody else's problem, we'll keep extracting, like fish in the ocean or clean air or clean water. But what Elinor Ostrom proved is that the tragedy of the commons is not operative in place, is that we can see the ramifications of how we are impacting it. And we eventually say, we got to fix that. We got to stop doing that. So what we like to say is that we will save the earth place by place. We heal the earth place by place. And if we get here's a little bit of a conceit on my part, but it gives me hope. There are 4,037 cities on the planet larger than 100,000 people. If we get, in marketing, if you get 3.5% of a market, you've got the whole market, because it's just going to cascade. 100th monkey syndrome. So if we get 141 cities, which is 3.5% of 4,037, we will save the earth. So my objective is to reach 141 cities and help them actually experience this different relationship with the environment that supports them. Now, I know that's a big ask, but you know what? It's less of an ask than saving the earth. So worth a shot. All right. I'm going to share with probably the most important framework that we use in our practice. This is a 4,000-year-old framework, and it's called the Law of Three. Is that all life can be seen as an activating force and a restraining or receiving force. You want to build a building? Nature says, we don't want you to build here. Or the community says, I don't want you to build here. There's always restraints. And what we have a tendency to do is we compromise or concede. I'll give up a little, I'll give up some square footage, square meters. You give up having to deal with this project nearby. We both feel our egos have been beaten up, but all right, we're big people, we'll accept that and move on. And meanwhile, we've destroyed a little bit of both of our quality of life. Maybe 3 years later, we wake up and say, why did I roll over on that one? It was a terrible decision. Or I didn't get the kind of resources and income that I needed to get. Why did I give up? I didn't fight it. Well, nature doesn't work that way. Nature doesn't compromise. Nature harmonizes. It adapts. It reconciles. And the willow tree, for instance, does not negotiate with the oak tree about exchanging nutrients. It doesn't say, well, you made me pretty angry last week, so I'm going to pull back some nutrients from you and show you how tough I am. No, they know that each other is dependent on the system and each other to support one another. It's not even questioned. Yet we negotiate in life. But what they do is they are always then adapting, though, to new externalities and situations that arise but they're working together to adapt. They're not fighting it and trying to stop the change, because change is inevitable. Our culture, we're always thinking that life is stable and static and it's always going to be the same. Well, good luck with that, because it's going to change every year. And we struggle so much with that concept. So we work then with not problems, because problems fragment the world. This is what that quoted by Gregory Basins at the beginning. Life works differently than we think it does. And we try to solve problems, but when we try to solve a problem, we actually end up creating more problems, because we're only focused on one thing, and there's so many unintended consequences if we only focus on one thing. So this is why working with a child, right? You don't try to work on one problem the kid has. You work on with their potential, and then you can work, as long as you're honoring their potential, then solving their problems makes sense, and they'll honor that, respect that. The same thing with the community. If we work on the potential of the community, the problems now have a vessel to be held and worked with. So I love Danelle Meadows' quote, the famous systems thinker: we cannot impose our will on a system. We can listen to what the system tells us and discover how its properties and our values can work together to bring forth something much better than could ever have been produced by our will alone. And that's what I mean by harmonizing. It's actually willing to lean into that and see what emerges. Now this, you asked about how we get work. Often this is how we get work, because developers, this one developer down in Chile saw a lecture I gave and said, I'm sorry, you're getting text across my screen here. They said, we've been working on a 1.5 million square foot development in Viña del Mar, Chile, which is just north of Valparaiso, sister city to Valparaiso, on this oil tank farm. This is an oil company. And they said, we want to actually give a gift to the city of a mixed use development / park / beach relationship. And 25 activist groups emerged in the city to fight them. And they said, if you can harmonize those 25 people and our development, you're worth 15 years worth of lawyers. They said, we don't believe you can do it. We don't know how you would do it, but we'll give you 2 months to show us your stuff if you're interested. So we said, well, we're game if you are. So they invited us down. And that's what I had the discussion with the project manager about changing the master plan, because they had a master plan designed. But one of the things that emerged, let me see what kind of time we have left. One of the things that emerged is that their public relations department, sat down with them and they had a SWOT analysis for all these 25 activist groups, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And they did an analysis about, how they're going to fight these 25 activist groups. Whoa, this is not going to work. This doesn't work to fight. And then I met with the CEO and I said, why are you developing this real estate project? It's not your core business. The core business is forestry, fisheries, and oil, gasoline. And they said, well, we want to give a gift to the city. I said, it does not sound like you're giving a gift. It sounds like you're going to war. And he said, oh, wow, that is right. So I said, let us work with trying to actually work with people on this footing of how we all can work together for something that's meaningful for us. So in fact, let me just jump ahead. Yeah, so I want to jump ahead to this. I want to come back to this. So instead of working on the project and justifying the project and arguing and compromising, like saying, we'll give you a swimming pool if you let us build a project. We'll build a school for you if you let us build a project. We'll give you access to the park if you let us build a project. That's a transactional relationship, and that's a compromising relationship. Instead, we said, let's look at the whole city and see what, and the ecological region, and how it works, and how all of us, all the stakeholders can work together, including the developer. The developer is no more important or less important than any other stakeholder. Let's see how we work together. The only thing that we said to the community is the developer deserves to make a profit on this project because they're making a big risk. Other than that, they do not have any right to tell you what they're building. We need to figure this out together. But we need to figure this out together of what it's in service of, not just your desire versus their desire. That ends up being a fragmented way of looking at things. So we went back and we found out that this city, just like a long story short, was one of the great garden cities of the world. They borrowed the English garden city tradition in the late 1800s and created a city that looked like this. It's spectacular, except it doesn't look like this anymore. It looks like this. They have forgotten who they are. The Bay of Valparaiso Bay is a dead zone. The estuary, which is that line right there, if you can see my cursor in the lower left picture, has been made 75% of it's filled to make it into a parking lot. And the estuary is the source of fish and health for the Sea of the Valparaiso, for the Pacific Ocean and Valparaiso Bay. The quality of the architecture has been destroyed. So it is a dying city. You drive into the city in 5 minutes and you know it's dying. So what we said is we're going to look at, here's the site, but we're going to look at this whole system out 20 to 30 kilometers, because that's the watershed or life shed of this place, and find out its patterns of life, its inherent nature. What we found out, this is very interesting, unlike any city we'd ever seen, is that every time humans engaged in this place, whether it's the Aconcagua, Inca, or Bata Indians, to the Spanish, to the British, to the railroads, to the industrial cities, to the Garden City movement, the system of life actually became more diverse and resilient, very unusual. And it wasn't until 30 years ago that everything started going off the rails. Look at tourism. This is a touristic town. When the tourism started going downhill, that's when they realized they were in trouble. But what we found out is that they had a tradition of innovating succession, or compounding resilience, if you will. And we spoke to that when we met with the people and said, this city has the capability to recover itself. When we look at this larger system, they said, that is great. We are willing to do that as long as the developer is willing to do that too. So in 2 weeks, it went from people being negative to either enthusiastic or supportive. Not all of them, but these are the first 18 groups of people we met with. So it shows you how powerful this kind of co-creative message is that you can get people communicating with each other when there's a higher purpose, when there's that harmonizing purpose involved. And that is, considering our political climate in this country, for instance, that's a pretty significant message. If we work, because compromise is a slower way to die, just like sustainability is a slower way to die. We consider compromise the height of political sophistication. It is not. It's harmonization. And the only way to work on harmonization is to be aligned around common purpose. So basically what we did in this community for the next 4 years, because it takes that. Remember I said that the Brattleboro Co-op came back to us within a year and said, we want to apologize. It takes about a year for the myelination in your brain to start shifting to a new paradigm. And it takes about 3 years for that shift to be permanent. So when we talk about sustainability, you cannot just deliver sustainability in a building. You actually have to deliver a practice of engaging people around deeper purpose, because it's a practice. Just like exercise or learning a language or playing an instrument or meditation, it doesn't happen in a weekend. So anytime somebody says, we're going to help you be sustainable, and they do it over a weekend or 2-week period, walk away as fast as possible, because you'll be wasting your money. It's a practice. And what you need to be doing is, whether you do it or they do it, or you do some level of combination, is help people live into the promise and the potential that you've identified. And so this is what we did for 3 years in Chile. Small group meetings, large group meetings. And right now, the project, one of the biggest concerns for this project was that it was a brownfield. And it was incredibly frightening to the people in Chile, because they don't have brownfield standards. So they were literally terrified of the petroleum pollution, which was actually, we consider that pretty easy to solve in our country, but they were terrified. And so what we did is we worked with, there are 11 universities in this area. We got the professors from different expertise areas to collaborate together. And if you know how to work with academics, that is an incredibly difficult process to get to integrate a bunch of academics. And it was like herding cats, but we did it. And it took about a year. At the end of that year, they produced a report and the process of remediating the brownfield. And the community said, okay, if our professors, who they knew, right, they were their neighbors, if our professors say this, we trust them. We don't trust you, Mr. Gringo from the States. We don't trust the company that's building this, because they're the enemy, but we do trust our professors. And that allowed for the first brownfield remediation protocol to be adopted in Chile. So that happened last summer. So it's working. And this is a 15-year process, folks. This is a big project. Here's the cool thing. So not only did the community start getting in these meetings, did people start emerging and offering benefits to the city and the project. Oh my goodness, where'd it go? This estuary needs to be totally dug out and restored. And the Chamber of Commerce, who did not want to talk to us when we first got there, the guy said to me, buddy, we know how it works. We don't need to talk to a guy from the States. See you later. But we then started assembling these meetings, going the wrong way. We started assembling these meetings, and that word gets around that something effective is going on. There's actually progress being made. And he called up our client 10 months into this work and said, Ricardo, I don't know what you guys are doing, but count us in. This is the first time the city's been able to dream in 30 years. And they donated $4 million to begin the restoration process of this estuary, which had nothing to do with the project itself, but had everything to do with the health of the system. Now we're talking about sustaining life. And so let me see. Oh yeah, let me just kind of summarize this. These are the last 2 slides. I think I'm reasonably close to being done. First of all, that if we work with our places, it's our home. We're not debating about religion. We're not debating about politics. We're not debating about race. We're actually working on the health of our home. That unites most everybody. And then, since we're human beings or social beings, we actually want to be in relationship, but unless we have common purpose, we have no reason to be in relationship. It used to be the church was, 150 years ago, was the driver in culture, no longer. But what we do have is the health of our home, the health of our place, and raising that up brings people together like nothing I've ever seen. And then it's a practice. And that's what we're doing, is continually regenerating ourselves and our relationships to evolve, to participate with life. And Simone Veil's statement, I think, is supportive of this. You want to save the planet, start at home. Place is a doorway into caring. Rootedness in place is the most important and least recognized need of the human soul. And love of place unleashes the personal and political will needed to make profound change. So that's the nature of this work, is we're generating our relationship with place. And then we can then design our buildings in such a way that we support that place. So it's the process of engaging ourselves in this thinking that building design gives us an opportunity to engage in. You know, when real estate projects come into a community, they bring people out, right? I don't want that building, or I love this building, or I don't like the way it looks. Good. You want all that energy, because that allows people to congregate around something that's important to them. And then you can work with them on deepening how we engage going forward. I think I am done. Oh yeah, that's enough. I'm going to finish there, guys. So thank you very much. And I guess we only have a couple minutes, but happy to field some questions.
Well, Bill,
Thank you so
very
much.
Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, you were going to say the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, no, Bill, thank you very much for that presentation. It was very interesting, very insightful in all the work that's being done. You hear about a lot of this green movement, all the smaller things to be done on it, but you don't hear of these larger works being taken that literally are transforming landscapes back into how they should be. So quick, and for anyone listening in, please feel free to throw any questions into the chat box or the Q&A, and we'd be happy to address those. But in the meantime, Bill, a lot of these, a lot of the projects that you talked about very much were on the large scale, very elaborate tasks, talking with chambers of commerce, city managers, etc. How do we, as people that aren't necessarily as involved in that, how do we break down those from these big elephant-sized chunks into smaller bits, and what can we do? I know there's things people talk about like composting, etc., but what are the tasks that we can do to start making these almost like a butterfly effect, little small changes that snowball into larger things?
Sure. So two things went on my mind. You guys do housing, correct? That's Kendal.
Kendal does.
Yeah,
Kendal at Home brings services and opportunities to people who decide to live in their homes.
In their own homes.
Yes.
Yes. That's cool. Huh. I should be talking to you guys.
Well, I've got your number, Bill.
Thanks, Paul. So yeah, at a smaller scale, I'm glad to hear it's great. That's great, guys. But at the smaller scale, the most important question we can ask is, what can we do in our environment to support the critters, the birds, the worms, the coyotes, the raccoons, the squirrels, the insects in particular. Insects and birds are the most endangered species right now in North America. What can we do to provide homes for them? Because they are the source of our clean water and clean air. People don't make that connection, but without them, we don't have quality of life. Plus, we miss a lot of beauty. So I recommend at the simplest level is to minimize turf grass and begin to build and allow to grow natural environments for meadow grasses or small bosques of forest in your yard. That's what we've done in ours, for instance. So, and then support codes in your community that reduce light intensity, because lights actually disrupt and send animals away. Direct, very indirect lighting, low level lighting. No more salt on the roads. We're destroying our water systems just because we're afraid to drive. We want to be able to drive like it's dry weather outside. So there's so many kind of assumptions that we make about our rights as human beings that we actually need to stop assuming that and actually start thinking about others' rights, meaning those other non-human groups out there that actually are integral to our quality of life. I don't know, that may be too simplistic, but that's the way I look at it.
No, that's how you start, right? I mean, that's how those of us who are not initiated in this world before today or understanding of it, how we start. So that's a really good point. I have a more kind of a different type of question. Who's on your team? Who do you employ? You know, you called yourself a recovering architect. Do you have biologists and ornithologists and city
yeah.
planners on your team, or how does that work?
No, it's that question gets asked a lot, and we intentionally do not have that level of specialty on our team. What we are primarily trackers. Now, I'm an architect, but I'm being trained to be a tracker. And let me explain why that is. Trackers look for patterns.
Mhm.
And if we find that we are too specialized, we're only looking at patterns in our particular silo. That's what scientists look for, patterns too. Everybody looks for patterns, right? That's how we prove things. But what we're looking for are evidence of patterns that keep repeating. And so we have people that are applied naturalists, if you will. We have people that are actually doing the same thing with organizations. So we have organizational development experts and naturalists that are looking at ecological systems as a whole. When we find out the leverage points that are necessary, like this river needs restored, we will hire in then very specific restoration specialists or the systems that actually make the most sense to begin to work on that are beyond our expertise. But we want that large, we are the broad generalist integrators to look at the system of problems. So we're systems thinkers. And you can come at this from any profession, it doesn't matter, as long as you have an interest in looking for repeating patterns, because that's what identifies a track. If you're in a forest, for instance, and see a hoof print on the soil, is it a male deer? Is it a female deer? Is it a deer? Well, you go along a little further, you see a little tuft of brown hair that only can come from a deer. Well, that looks like a deer. And then a little further along, you may see some browsing in a bush that was a food that only male deer eat or deer eat. Well, that's three pieces of evidence that indicate, well, that's a male deer that we're seeing here. And so that's what we're doing in communities. We're actually inviting people to look for the patterns in their communities, and they begin to understand their life, the way life works there on its own terms. I like to say people fall in love with life again when they work with us, because understanding is the beginning of care, of love, of at least like, right? And that's the beginning of taking care of what you care about. So it's actually pretty simple stuff. The hard part in this work is holding true to that system and not collapsing back into, well, let's just solve the problem because we got to get done by next week.
Yep, good point.
And by the way, when we work, just for anybody who's listening, when we work, we end up getting our approvals an average of 18 months faster than competition. Because when you work with communities on their own terms and in that level of understanding, you don't have people fighting. So this is actually incredibly cost effective and money saving. It takes time at the beginning, but slow down to go fast is the watchword.
Well, I have to say too, as you've talked, it's been very evident how much attention to detail that you have throughout everything, and trying to uncover not just what's there on the surface, but what's underneath. As you're talking about that example with the deer, trying to do deductive reasoning to see what actually might be there and how we might be able to work with that. Or in the past where I think it was with New Mexico, where you were talking about with the watershed thing, and you used the reasoning to say, well, there used to be a pond here, so there used to be a bed of water. How can we get this here? And then to go back through the historical records to find out, well, there were dams that created this, and that's how it works. It's very interesting to see how you can look at something and go farther than what's just on the surface.
Yeah, thanks. That's true. And and basically we're uncovering patterns. You know, if I could take a minute or two, to get to know any living entity requires that we not fragment him or her, let's take a human being. If I wanted to get to know you, Ryan, the way we get to know our cities or ecosystems, I would take your liver and kidneys and skeletal structure, maybe your DNA sequencing, and I would throw it in a pot, throw all your organs in a pot and stir it around. And do I have a whole system? Do I have Ryan? If I throw all those things in a pot? I don't think so. Ryan, I got a mess, right? Got a sloppy mess. I don't get Ryan. So basically, the way I get to know Ryan is not through pieces and fragments, but I take a step back and I get to know Ryan as an entity. So how do I know that? I get to know you by how you are in relationship to other people, your partner or kids or parents or colleagues, your dog, cat, whatever. Those relationships, how you live your life, those are invisible. Actually, you can't see them, but you can sense them, you can experience them. Those relationships tell me more about Ryan than any individual thing in your body. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And it's interesting as you're talking about that. And actually that's a fantastic segue into here as we wrap up this discussion, talking about next steps for us too. Something here coming up for us, something Kendal at Home really looks at is taking a step back and looking at the person as a person, not an event in time, but who are you? What's your career? What's your family like? Where are you trying to go? And what are your goals and how can we get you there? So if that sounds of interest to you on that, Tuesday, January 11th. So next Tuesday at 2 p.m., we have our Make a New Year's Plan with Kendal at Home, where we'll be talking more about Kendal at Home. And so this is just a virtual information session for any potential members, families. If you are a member, any neighbors, family members who you think might be interested in joining this Kendal at Home community, please feel free to pass along this information and join. It's about an hour long, 40 minutes of a seminar and some time for questions at the end. And we can go from there. And then on Tuesday, January 18th, also at 2 p.m., we have Hike the Good Hike, advocating for mental and physical health with Jesse Cody and Ty Gagney. Well, they'll be talking about going outside, exploring and clearing your mind and refreshing in that way. And as always, we do thank Friends Foundation for the Aging for sponsorship of these events. You can find them on our website, kendalathome.org, up in the courses and seminars up in the top right corner for both of those. But Bill, thank you so much for your discussion today with us and taking the time to talk about seeing relationships in nature and trying to improve how we cohabitate and live with nature and not just of it.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was great.
All right.
Really great.
Talk soon.
Happy New Year, everyone.
And
Thank
happy
you very
New Year.
much.
Bye-bye.
Take care.